What does being heroic really mean? Does it mean standing on a mountaintop, having vanquished all your enemies with sweat glistening off your body? Or does it mean being vulnerable and doing what's right? It's a question that I ask myself constantly. It's a question I'm sure many men ask themselves. And it's a question that we've probably asked ourselves since the beginning of time in one way or another. So today, for Thursday for Knowledge, I invited Nicolai Schümann, who's an old friend of mine and indeed a Mankind Project brother of mine, to come in and talk about his new book, What We Can Learn from Heroes, which talks exactly about that in depth. And we go through this in great detail. We look at what's the cost of being heroic, and we look at what are the ingredients that makes up a hero, and if there are any, and what's the personal cost to us, and what do we have to pick up and what do we have to put down in order to be the central character in our lives. Take a look, see what you think, take what you need, leave what you don't. Become major, Paul. Live like a hero. That's what the classics teach us. Be a main character. Otherwise, what is life for? J.M. Coetzee. Welcome all you magnificent men that are watching, and welcome to Nicolai, who's here today to talk about his new book, The Hero Inside, and for us to have a conversation about heroes in general, the importance of heroes, and about finding your own hero, which obviously within this group is something that I hope we all see as very important. So let's kick off. Let's kick off with some introductions. I'm Laurence Johns, and if you're watching this, then hopefully you'll know me. I'm one of the co-founders of this group, and the object of this group really is to bring men together in a platform where we can share ideas freely and collaborate and share resources. And that's why I invited Nicolai on today, just to really share some of the insights he's got that he's gained from his years of experience as a lecturer, trainer, and entrepreneur, and through his journey of writing The Hero Inside. So why don't we start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hello everybody out there. I don't see you, but I trust that you all see me now. And my name is Nicolai Schümann. I'm a lecturer at City University and a guest lecturer at Queen Mary's and Goldsmiths. And I also run a storytelling consultancy, and I write screenplays, among other things. And yeah, I wrote this book, The Hero Inside, which is very much based also on my storytelling lectures, and partly also, if I may say, on my experience with MKP.
Great. So let's start talking about the hero. So tell me about the hero. Tell me about the hero as you perceive it in this book.
I mean, the interesting thing is that heroes are mostly very ordinary people, right? It's only the deeds that make them heroic. And the interesting fact is that there's a fine line between heroism and compassion, for example, or heroism and being altruistic. So the fine line is when you're altruistic, for example, you do something good and you don't expect anything in exchange. The hero does the same thing, but he goes a step further. He's even willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. And that is what ultimately makes a hero, that he makes a greater good more important than himself.
Okay. And so you give examples through your book. Who are some of the examples? Maybe just give some of the people who are watching this now some of the examples of men who you consider to be heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is that I would, for example, would regard some of the frontline workers at the NHS nowadays as heroes, right? Because they put themselves in risk for the greater good, right? Or if you go a bit more back in history, I give a couple of examples. For the Rosa Parks was a hero because she actually said she's not going to get up and give up a seat for white people in a white area, because she doesn't see the point of segregation, right? And she knew that she's gonna suffer for it, but she also knew that she is helping the greater good for that, right? Or Irina Sendler, who was a Catholic priest in the 1940s from Poland, and she basically managed to save a couple of hundred Jewish children from the Holocaust, even though she was tortured by the Nazis and she was locked in, but she wouldn't never ever give away their names, because the greater good and the common good was more important in her life than herself.
And so, I mean, when I was reading the book, one of the things that I found particularly interesting is kind of how the book was structured. And there seemed to be kind of like 12 kind of key areas. And almost when I was looking at them, they could almost be like a sort of attribute. Like when I was looking at them, I thought this is almost like a, you know, I looked at most of them for this is a shopping list really of what I would consider a hero, like to have these bits. And I'll just go through them. So proactivity, self-determination, grit, positivity, stoicism, integrity, purposefulness, altruism, responsibility, courage, shadows, and curiosity. Now, I think most people looking at that would kind of go, yeah, that's a great thing. That's a great thing. I can see why you need that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But shadows in there, I found really interesting. And obviously we have a shared experience in your, as you said, you're an MKP man, as I am. So we have a shared experience of the Mankind Project. So I believe we have a kind of understanding of why shadow is important. But I'd just like you to share why shadow featured so prominently in the book.
Yeah, I mean, just for the start, I mean, this book is structured in 12 different character traits, right? So for me, it was important to feature the 12 most common traits all heroes have in common, because all other books I know about heroes out there, they're focused more on the hero journey, right? But they never really analyze the character traits too much. And by analyzing all the heroes out there, I found the shadow thing very, very prominently out there. And the reason is that heroes, they visit their dark side. They visit their shadows, because people who don't really visit their shadows tend to suppress them. I mean, shadows in that respect means the buried, seemingly negative character traits we have, right? And if we bury them and if we suppress them, you know what happens is that they get magnified, right? And we have these outbursts, and we might shout at people, or they come out when we don't need them or we don't want them. So it's important, and this is an heroic trait as well, to visit those character traits, these dark character traits, to own them, right? And then we can make actually use of them. So if we, for example, if there's a lot of anger in us, right, rather than wanting us to get it, to let it burst out in situations where we don't need it, we rather own it, and we know, okay, there is a lot of anger in us, and we can turn it to a positive almost, because in anger, there's also a lot of energy, right? And there's a lot of proactivity if we use it rightly. And I think this is, I mean, the most prominent examples, obviously, is, I have a lot of film examples in my movie. And so one prominent example is Star Wars, for example, right? Because there was this Luke Skywalker and his father, and they all had these really enormously dark traits within them. And one visited it and owned it and turned it into the good eventually. And the other kind of suppressed it and didn't manage to handle it, and then completely turn evil in the end. I mean, that is obviously an over-the-top example. But the moral here is that you need to bury for your character, for your dark character traits, and find them and own them. Because if you don't, what happens in life is that you start projecting. Whenever you meet somebody who owns your shadow trait, you start projecting against them and you start disliking them, right? And this is one thing we definitely don't want to. And the other beauty of finding and owning our shadow traits is it can be help our creativity. So a lot of like creative movements, like the punk movement or the film noir movement or the Black series of Goya, they're all based on artists, on people visiting the dark side, visiting the wild side. Yeah, like in this old children book classic, Where the Wild Things Are. So there's this little boy who literally visits the wild side, the dark side of him, and he comes back as a bigger man.
I mean, that was one of the things I really sort of enjoyed about the book, actually, was the references were very modern. You know, you had Star Wars in there and you had Indiana Jones. There was quite a large Spielberg influence, I see. But like, I mean, if and I say that half jokingly, but like Spielberg in a way is kind of one of the great modern storytellers of this period. So of course he would, you know, and if you look at his films, like, you know, if you go through E.T. and if you go through Indiana Jones and you know, all of his big movies and the ones that he produced and was active in, they do have a very sort of, they do use that hero's journey very kind of very blatantly. You know, it's he you know, obviously, because I think a lot like Lucas, I think they were both influenced by Joseph Campbell quite a lot. So obviously they're sort of taking that idea of the hero. But one of the things that I liked about what you were just saying there is that idea of shadow and having to go into the shadow. Often in you know, those stories and in terms of fairy tales, you know, there's often that sense of going into the woods, you know, going outside of what's normal and going into somewhere that's dark and frightening, and kind of having to face the monster that's in there, and that's coming up in video games now, and it's kind of, and you know, I very much kind of like the mythopoetics. So to me, it makes sense that that's the case, because I believe that's what's in here. So with how narrative is changing, and I'm talking to you here because of your storytelling background, obviously. Do you think the structure of the hero's journey will change, or do you think that it's so kind of interlocked in our psyche that no matter how advanced storytelling becomes, it will somehow remain?
I mean, I think it will always remain. I mean, keep in mind that Joseph Campbell found out that the hero's journey is the structure or the backbone of pretty much every story over all cultural and ethnic groups out there. So if you tell a story to an Eskimo and then you tell the same story to an Indian in the Amazon, they will both understand it because they're both intrinsically, intuitively understand the heroic journey, right? And I don't think it's gonna be changed per se. I mean, even if you take like modern TV shows or like Breaking Bad or the Game of Thrones or whatever, they're very complicated and they have very ambivalent characters. However, the journey, the backbone, the narrative backbone remains intact, right? Like the hero's journey. It obviously, I mean, the beauty of the hero's journey is ultimately it's so complex that you can vary it almost indefinitely, right? And but I think it has also something very satisfying to it, right? So, I mean, if you do a story which completely deviates from the hero's journey, then there's a chance you lose the audience, right? Because they are so used to this pattern, they're so used to this backbone that it's very hard to completely eradicate it from the storytelling.
Completely breaks the rules. It just becomes noise.
Absolutely, it's like then you're you're doing art, basically, in art, like Andy Warhol filming a naked man for 12 hours or something, right? That's not a hero's journey anymore, but it's arguably not very entertaining either, right? So, I mean,
I think
not for
also
12 hours, I guess.
what's sort of coming to mind as you're speaking is also I really like the work that I really like the work of Hillman now, who I see as many ways to kind of picking up where Jung left off and running, you know, and he was saying, so I was listening to Between Worlds, I think, and he was saying about how the reason that so much outside is structured as it's structured internally, and that we have these archetypal characters, is because there's a need in us as humans to kind of bring out the bits of us that seem unfathomable, or that we can't look at or can't understand because they seem too big, and pull them out in front so that we can have a dialogue with them. And one of the things he talks about, which I thought was fantastic, was he was saying that's why in early cultures there was gods for so many different things. Like we needed a god of love, because if we was in a hard relationship, or we were feeling lonely, or we couldn't find love, at least then we could go to some deity and go, you're the god or goddess of love. What's going on? Like, how can I, and you could have some sort of conversation, some sort of thought with that part of yourself, which wouldn't be possible if there wasn't a personification of it. And I have finally got round, because I have a young son, I can't watch any sort of film that isn't a cartoon. I finally got round to watching Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix version, and I'd heard it was dark, you know, and then I was like, that is a dark film, you know, that is a dark film, and so much of it was about shadow, like his own shadow, where his shadow come from, and kind of society's shadow. There was a lot about what was going on in society, and how he was a reaction of that. So I'm guessing that, like, in a way, as long as we need to personify what's going on for us inside, we're in some way going to create these archetypal characters and this hero's journey. As long as we have to go inside to face our own darkness to find the light, we're going to find entertainment and release in the hero's journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very good point. I mean, ultimately, and that's the beauty of it, right? That heroes from the dawn of times, they are there to lead the way. I mean, they show us the light, and they always set a good example of how things ideally should be, right? And the biggest thing is, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is that heroes also always, they explain life in a way, right? They explain the truth. I mean, good storytelling is about explaining life and explaining truth. And by that, they create, in best case scenario, they create a ripple effect, right? Like Oscar Wilde said, that life imitates art more than art imitates life. And I believe in that. That it happened often in the history of not only storytelling, but of real life heroes as well, that they set such a strong example that many people followed them and turned the whole world a little bit to the better, right? And so this is one of the reasons I wrote this book, is that ideally it will create some ripple effects, right? People will adapt or get motivated through this book to adapt some heroic traits, and I believe that we're always under observation from somebody, right? We always teach somebody something, right? Even if we don't intend to, but somebody's always looking at us, right? And if we adapt more heroic traits, then we will create all these nice little ripples, and then they ripple to somebody else, and hopefully, and that is the main mission of the book, the world will be a tiny little bit better. At least I would like to think so.
Okay, so we're going to go on to talking a little bit about how the book came about. Now, I just want to, if anyone, to the people that are watching, we will have some time at the end of this to ask some questions. So if you are watching on Facebook and you want to put it any questions in the comments. I will pick them up at the end, and I'll do my best to ask as many of them as I can. So yeah, the book. Let's talk a little bit about where the book came from, and why you wanted to write it.
Yeah, I teach storytelling at City University and Cass Business School to MBAs and MScs since 8 years now. And I always teach them storytelling with the hero's journey, right? Because this is the ultimate story structure. And they always came to me after the class and asked me, but what is a hero really? And is there any way to become more heroic, or what are the character traits, and how can we learn a bit more from them? And then when I researched, I realized there is no such book out there really, right? And then obviously, I always talk about with my students about ethics, especially in business, because most of my students are business students, MBA students, right? And they're going on good business careers. And what I realized that, especially in business, if there were more people more heroic, then maybe the credit crunch and a lot of other tragic stuff in the business world that happened might not have happened. Because what I believe is that the opposite of a hero is not a villain. I mean, there will be always villains. There's nothing we can do about it. There will be always evil people, right? But I think what the opposite of a hero really is a bystander. It's people who see something bad happening, but just standing by and not interfering, not getting in there, right? And what a hero does, he's getting to action. He is proactive, right? And when he sees something bad happening, like the guys that the traders did during the credit crunch, or the managers at Enron or whatever, right? There's so many people who stood by and didn't do anything. And if we can motivate more of these bystanders to step in and do something and say something, then I believe we can turn this world. It could be a bit better eventually, right? Like the whistleblowers. I mean, you asked me for heroes, and I think the whistleblowers are the ultimate heroes for me, because they said, look, this is bad. They basically, I mean, Edward Snowden said that, right? That he exposed this whole shit the American government was doing to their people. And he probably lives in a prison for the rest of his life, right? But he did it anyway because he knew that it's good for society, right? So he basically sacrificed his own personal life for the greater good. And it doesn't always have to be that dramatic, but I think one of the main things is that you got to step in, you got to say something. If something's going wrong, then you should step in.
That's a really, really interesting point, because this group, the Magnificent Man Project, it was founded by myself and a guy called Tony Wise, and it came from that famous line about you being small does not serve the world, and that kind of struck a chord with me, and what you're talking about in terms of there are no villains, like it's bystanders. That's kind of a little bit about what this group in a small way is trying to do. It's trying to say that, like, it's not enough to not do bad, that somehow you've got to stake a claim, and not in some massive it doesn't have to be a massive grandiose activity, but you've got to kind of be present in a way and try and make the changes where you can, try and make the world a better place where you can, because by being a bystander, that isn't what the world needs right now. That's, you're just letting other things and other people kind of fill the gap, and if you stand back, others will step forward, and if they're not if you're not seeing the sort of people step forward in life who you want to step forward, then you're going to have to. I love that Charles Bukowski quote where he says, unfortunately, the good people in the world are riddled with self-doubt, and I can't remember the quote exactly, but you know, that idea of the good, you know, I've noticed from myself that, you know, and by looking out, often it seems to be easier to make a noise and easier to be seen and easier to make an impact if it's negative. It seems to be harder to make a positive impact in the world. And how I view it, the harder it is, the more heroic it is to then try it.
Absolutely. No, 100%. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, even though people often have a negativity bias, right? I mean, they tend to see negative things more prominently than positive things, right? So there's some initiatives who only focus on good news. And if you look at them, you see there's a lot of good stuff happening in the world, right? Only that the mainstream news is not covering them, right? They mainly cover the negative things, right? But no, I completely agree. I mean, and it's so easy to start these ripple effects, right? If you go volunteering like one day a month or something, or if you just get a pen pal from somebody out there in the world, where the people might have a harder life than we do, or if you, I think probably the most fulfilling thing is in teaching, right? So don't just give people fish, but teach them how to fish, right? Because I think once you pass on your skills or you pass on what you know to others, then automatically the ripple effect will get into action big time.
Yeah, and that ripples is something that I sort of want to bring us on to now, really, in a way, because when I got when I saw your book, I ordered a copy on Amazon, like pretty much straight away, and then I got one through the post from you, which was lovely to get, and it had a lovely card in there, which I hope you don't mind me saying, where it said, you know, if it wasn't for the Mankind Project, in some ways this book might not exist. And as the people on here know, I'm the training outreach director for the Mankind Project. So I can't kind of let that slip and not talk about the Mankind Project a little bit. It's a shared experience of ours, and to find out sort of in which way did it help this book come into existence.
Yeah, I mean, when I came to the Mankind Project and I did my weekend, I was already teaching storytelling for some years, right? And I was so mesmerized by the fact that the whole Mankind Project weekend is structured like a personal heroic journey. So you go through all the ups and downs, and you go really dark, and you really find something in yourself which might be dark and unpleasant. But in the end, you get out there and you transformed, right? And this is what the hero's journey is about, right? I mean, the bigger the obstacles and the harder the hardship is you face, the more there's a chance that you transform and then you grow as a person. And I found it so fascinating that the Mankind Project weekend encapsulated all of that, right? That you really managed to structure it in the way that man transformed on one single weekend. And this was another reason why then I said, look, I mean, there must be something to it, right? And this is why I then, 2 years later, I think, after I did the weekend with you, I kind of wrote the book, because I think it's so, this whole notion of going through this transformation and becoming a bit more heroic is so important for every man out there.
So in terms of, let's just broaden it out even bigger now to kind of where we are in terms of the world at the moment. And you know, I personally believe that now more than ever, we kind of need heroes. And I say heroes in the way that you describe them in your book. I'm not talking about kind of like, you know, big macho saviors who are going to come in and make the world a better place. I'm talking about like millions and millions and millions of heroes doing what they can to make the world a better place. I'm a big believer that the kind of in a way, the most heroic thing you can do is clean up your side of the street, really, and kind of your part first. So where are you with that? I mean, what can we do? What can we do to kind of encourage more heroes in that way in the world?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think starting to volunteer and helping others, which are neglected a bit these days. But I mean, the tragedy of COVID is that it kind of widened the gap even in society, right? And trying to help to close this gap again. I mean, this can be something very, very heroic, right? And reaching out to people who might not have been that lucky in the last couple of years, especially now. And yeah, and as I said, I mean, once you start working with people who might not have been that lucky, especially in the last year, that is already a step to heroism, right? Because that already can create these ripple effects. So I would highly recommend to do it, especially in these days. And keep in mind, I mean, heroism is very situational, right? And I think the beauty is, and I'm always an optimist, I think the beauty of this whole COVID pandemic was that it brought out a lot of heroes. It brought us, I call them heroes in waiting. I think there's a lot of heroes in waiting out there. And then they're just waiting on, they're just waiting for the right situation. And then they're finally ready to do their heroic deeds, right? And I think the beauty of this, if there was, I mean, obviously overall it's a tragedy, right? But some of the beauty of the pandemic was that it showed that there's a lot of heroes in waiting out there, and that there's a lot of people who then stepped up and did a lot of good things. And I think we are capable of that. That's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, a comment came in that kind of picks up on that by Tom Riley, and he's saying, being a mental health first aider allows me to see that there are real heroes out there. And that's exactly what we're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the hero is not the guy who jumps out of a plane with a parachute from the stratosphere, who is sponsored by an energy drink. No, the hero is the lady or the man who sits in a supermarket and gets exposed to a lot of people during a pandemic, or like the mental health workers or the NHS guys, right, who working front line, day in, day out. Those are the heroes.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a really nice place to kind of end this conversation. I have two questions which I always finish with. So I'm just going to ask you them now. So one of those is, if you could go back in time and meet yourself when you an adolescent, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give yourself, knowing you probably wouldn't listen? But what would it be?
I think it be more courageous. So I think I missed some opportunities in my life because I wasn't courageous enough. And ultimately, that's also a heroic trait, that there's so many people, in story terms, they're called threshold guardians, who kind of try to stop you from going on in your journey. And you just have to be more courageous sometimes in life, because ultimately there is not much at stake, right? In most situations.
That's just what I was thinking. It was like, that's one of the things I often think, I wish I would have known, I wish I would have understood really how powerful I was when I was a young man, when I was a younger man, because in many ways, just to the fact that there was nothing really to lose. Like, there was no, I was so kind of riddled with, not riddled, but I was so conscious of what other people were going to think of me, or how it could go wrong, and or how I should be thinking about planning a future and all that kind of stuff. When there was this period, where I could have really have done anything. I could have really have tried anything, because if you had to sleep in a park, I probably could have slept in a park. If I could, but often, and I see it in young men a lot now, and I see it in young women a lot now, and it brings me sadness, is they're often so insecure, so conscious of what everyone else is going to say, especially in this time of kind of social media and stuff like that, that it seems like they don't see just how powerful actually they are, just because of the sheer energy that they have. And so yeah, I find it really interesting that you say that also. because it's one of the things that I think, if we could just, if that was just harnessed, if there was some way, and I think our society sadly does a very, very good job in saying, keep in line, it's got to be like this. You can rebel in this little safe area, but don't go outside that. Like, you can experiment as much as you like, but when college stops, or when you're 20, you've got to stop too, and fall in line. I think we sadly do a very good job of that.
Exactly. That's again shadow work, right? So we are conditioned to suppress our shadow in our childhood, and then we kind of carry our shadow traits in a bag, and it drags us down in life. So we have to revisit them at one point.
Yeah, indeed. And so, final question is, what book has had the biggest impact on your life?
I think it was The Catcher in the Rye. I mean, I read it first when I was 14, 15, and I read it once every year, and it somehow struck a chord with me. There's always these teenager who is so rebellious because he just doesn't fit into society, and he basically goes so far that he has a complete mental breakdown at the end, right? But I find it so teaching of what society expects from us and what happens to people who rebel against it. And and the language is beautiful, right? So that was probably most impactful on me.
Yeah, I actually, I read that book first time when I was probably like 15, and loved it. And recently, over the last year, maybe 18 months, I've kind of been going back and revisiting a bunch of books that I read when I was about 15, 16, which I loved, and seeing which ones kind of stand the test of time. And I actually think I enjoyed Catcher in the Rye more reading it as an adult, because there was just something about that. I've just experienced more of what he would call phonies.
Mm.
And I just got sort of more angry than when I read it when I was a teenager. I think I was sort of angry enough, but it kind of kicked that back in. It is a truly, truly, truly fantastic novel.
Yeah, the interesting bit is, what a lot of people don't know is that The Catcher in the Rye is at its surface about this teenager breaking out from college, but ultimately it's a tragic story about a soldier coming back from World War II and being highly traumatized, right? So Salinger came back from World War II and was completely traumatized by all his experience, and he put all his experience into the body of a 15-year-old Holden Caulfield, right? And this is why it's so interesting, right? Because it tells both a teenager story, but ultimately it's a story of a highly traumatized soldier not being able to fit in with society anymore.
It's funny, that thing of, like, Hillman always says it's never about what it's about.
Yeah, exactly.
The one, we're going off the point slightly, but one of the books that I read recently, which in some ways hasn't stood up, is On the Road by Jack. Yeah. It's very chauvinistic, that book. It's very dated now in that way. But I tell you what I got from it, reading it as an adult, which I didn't get. I was very disappointed when I read it when I was like 15, 16. So, this is the great hippie book. I'm going to read this and I'm going to want to go hitchhiking around the world and all that. And it was about jazz and stuff, and I didn't get it, right? But it's really a love story, that thing. It's a sort of unrequited bromance between kind of Sonny and Neil Cassidy, and he's just kind of following this more exciting, vibrant, kind of angrier young man around America, trying to emulate him.
Absolutely. So probably Neil Cassidy was a personified shadow, right? He always tried to be, right? That is so interesting. This wildness, which he never really had.
Yeah. Great. Perfect place to leave. So I'll pop a link. It is available. It's on Amazon. Hero Inside. a really good book. I tell you, and the other thing I liked about it as well is you haven't sort of made it overly academic. Like, it's really accessible. It's not like endless quotes and backing up and reference. Really quick read, really insightful read, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you. Great to see you. And let's keep in contact.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon, Laurence. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.